The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. We've been here every day for you at 3 p.m. We want to thank you for tuning in. Our whole goal is to keep your head in the game, keep you positive and upbeat and learning and growing in art. We're bringing you the world's leading artist, including today, Mario Robinson. He's going to teach you about watercolor portraits.
I'm Mario Robinson, and today we're going to talk about watercolor. We're going to slay that watercolor giant. We're going to start with drawing, very detailed drawings, and going to loosen things up with some watercolor block ends. We're going to really throw some watercolor at the paper. We're going to also add some color, and ultimately we're going to take that realism in your paintings to the next level by adding dry brush. So let's get started. I'm really excited to get started, so let's jump in. Let's talk about my tools. I use a lead holder with a 6H lead, which is really hard. It's going to give you those crisp lines. So when you're drawing, you can avoid having a lot of loose graphite on the paper, which will mix with the water and have it bleed all over the place. And you don't want that. And the lead holder comes with a sharpener. So you can just sharpen it and get it as tight as you want, but don't prick yourself with it or test it because you'll bleed all over the place. Lastly, if you're like me, you're going to make mistakes. So let's have a kneaded eraser ready. So the kneaded eraser doesn't leave a lot of loose crumbs on your paper, and it'll just give you like a nice, smooth surface. You're not interrupting your surface at all. So the kneaded eraser is really good for when you get into situations where you have to erase. I want to talk a little bit about the composition and why I chose this composition. I put the figure right in the center of the paper just to draw the interest, and I turned her away from the viewer just to add a little bit of, so the viewer could feel a little more comfortable viewing the subject. And I added a little drapery with a dark background just to tie in this dark dress with the background so the eye has somewhere to meander and ultimately rest. So I'm going to start with an ultramarine blue and a burnt umber. I've tried a few mixtures, but they seem to change the temperature. I've tried burnt sienna and Payne's gray, and they just seem to shift a little too quickly. So I settled upon burnt umber and ultramarine blue, so I'm going to get that mixed up, and we'll start the block in. So let's put these paints on the palette, and let's get to it. Put my burnt umber in there, and I kind of keep these two colors together just so they're like neighbors. And then I'll explore the full palette later, but I want to keep these two separated from all the other colors. And I'll put the ultramarine blue in. Now, okay, so I want to fill up one of these muffin pans, and that's how I measure my washes. So it kind of gives me the leeway to either add more water or more pigment. So I kind of fill it 3/4 of the way to the top. And doing it with a spray bottle gives you just a little more control rather than pouring it in there. So I use a beat up brush, something synthetic that you really don't care too much about, because when you're stirring and mixing, it's really hard on the hairs of the brushes. So I just have an inexpensive Cotman brush by Winsor Newton that I'm going to mix my colors with. I start with the ultramarine, the burnt umber. I start with the burnt umber because it's less of a granule paint and it won't settle like the ultramarine blue does. So I'll mix even parts of these two until it comes to a neutral gray. And this helps keep your value right in the middle. It doesn't shift too warm or too cool. And when it starts to look right to my eye, I'll test it on my paper. And you can use your eye. And if it looks too warm or too cool, like this does, I'm going to add a little more blue to it to cool it off. And be careful that you stir this really, really, really aggressively, because sometimes the paint kind of gets trapped in the hairs and you put it on your painting, it'll ruin your painting. So just keep stirring it aggressively. Now I'm going to add a little water to it just so it can thin it out. And you want to kind of be able to see through your mixture. This is kind of like the boring part. It'll get much more interesting as you go through add your colors and you're throwing watercolor around, but this is kind of like eating your vegetables. And that's the color we're looking for. So I'm going to grab a number 7. I use soft sable brushes that come to a really fine point. So you can lay down massive washes, and you can also go in and kind of define areas with these brushes. Again, I want to stir the bottom, make sure nothing's settling in, and you want to have a napkin ready to catch any extra watercolor. You want to really be ready because watercolor is sneaky. It can sneak up on you. You can turn your back on it for 1 second, and you'll turn around, and it'll drip all over your painting. So just be ready for anything. So before I put anything down on the surface, I get the extra watercolor off the brush just so I can have a little bit more control. So I'm going to start with my darkest areas, my shadow areas, and really define those. And this kind of sets the table for the whole painting. You just want to ease into it. And by adding these values, you're really making life much easier for yourself later. You know, you can work with more massive areas of color. This is just really separating shapes. You get that value, just get the proper values and get that out the way so you can kind of have fun later. And I've kind of developed this style from looking at really chromatic watercolors over time and wondered why all of the skin tones were as red as lobsters sometimes, and there was no real depth to them. So I said, oh wow, maybe if I put a value underneath it and work with pure color, thin layers of color, maybe, just maybe, the watercolor will actually look like a more realistic medium. So I'm just blocking in these darker areas. And you can move around, just move around a little bit, and these areas will be drying. So you can just work back around and just really define each of these areas. And one thing I like to do is just put the bigger areas in, just to mask them in so they can just dry while I'm working around other areas. I'm going to keep the edge of this hairline soft. So I'm going to put pure water. I'm just going to frame the face with water. This is pure water. So when I come through with the watercolor, this will keep that edge soft. So I'm going to just do this massive push so this can dry. And anywhere you want to carve out and leave a lighter area, just put water there. This is almost like using the water as a white paint, like oil painters. So anywhere you want to make it lighter, just put water there. And it'll kind of block the staining process of the watercolor. So I'm just going to put this here. And I have the water to keep the edge of the hair soft. You just want to work that down. You don't have to really control it. Watercolor is best when it's kind of left free to meander. You just want to guide it. So this glaze, this wash will go on and it'll take a few minutes to dry. So while it's drying, I'm going to work around the face. Then I'm going to come back and embellish it. So I don't have to really push my darks too much with full color. I could just put this value underneath and it'll actually do the work for me. It'll make my life much easier when I'm going in with the full color. So I'll let that dry. So I'm going to start working on some of the curves and trying to turn the form on the face. So I'm going to wet this area. On the cheek. And then I'm going to put the color right in the middle of that and try to keep these edges really soft. You see how it's bleeding? You want that. You want to keep that edge really soft. So it kind of just funnels through and then soften it. If you see it getting too hard of an edge, quickly just soften it. So watercolor is very sneaky. Very sneaky. You have to really be engaged. That's why I like watercolor, because it forces me to really be alive in the moment. I kind of live in the moment. And this will dry lighter. So you want to be a little aggressive when you're mixing, because you're going to be putting water underneath, so you're going to be diluting whatever mixture you have. You're going to dilute it, so you want to just be a little aggressive with your color mixture. Now let that settle. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush, just so I can kind of work on some of these smaller areas, features of the face. And each brush, depending on the size, holds more pigment. So if you want to just make something lighter, just switch to a smaller brush. And it'll go on just a little bit lighter than this is a 7. I started with the 8. So this 7 is going to hold just a little less pigment, so it'll make things just a little bit lighter as it goes on the surface. This eye is already drying, so I'm going to go in and reinforce these areas with the second glaze. You can see that they're already a little bit darker, so the shapes are being broken up. With each glaze, it gets a little bit darker. I'm going to soften this edge, so I'm going to put clear water here. And just like I did with the cheek, I'm going to pour the pigment into this and keep a soft edge where that turns into shadow. And this is really making life easier for you. You'll see when we go into the color phase of it, you'll see that I don't have to do a lot of this manipulation. I can just put pure color over this block end, and I'll still have the block end coming through, and you'll be able to see the effect of the block end. So I'm going to start working my midtones. There's a little bit of a shadow under here where it rolls into the cheek, so I'm going to put water there, keep that light, and put my pigment into it. And again, that edge is a little hard, so I'm going to soften it with the napkin. Paper towel here. And as you work around, you'll start to feel where you need to put water. Anywhere there's a little bit of a highlight, and you want to keep edges soft, hit it with your water. And you see the form already wanting to turn a little bit. It's already starting to get a 2D effect. Keep this whole thing soft. And the choice to work wet into wet is really up to the artist, but I'm a big fan of keeping edges soft, and so I use a lot of water on the surface. I really rarely put any pigment down without putting water down. Only my darkest darks, like I did with the hair, would I put something really solid down as far as pigment without putting water down. It's just a rule of thumb that I like to live by. Keep this shadow soft. It's very easy to age a young person, so keep all the lines or the shadows really soft, and just really be mindful of putting water down on the surface. No one wants to look older than they are. So let's just keep everything soft. So while that's drying, I'm going to work myself down to the dress. We got a good start there. So I'm going to use my number 8, and I'm going to block this dark area in. I like my edges just a little soft too, so I added a little water to the bottom so the watercolor can freely run down without it looking like a big cutout or cut off at the bottom of this page, the paper. So I'm just going to let this run into that and create a little bit of a little poetry there. And that's the beauty of watercolor. I just love the freedom, just the meandering quality of it. It's never stagnant. It's just like life. It's always moving. It's always transient. And just let it flow. And some people ask me, isn't it hard to control? I don't want it to be controlled. I want it to just freely run and just kind of rein it in a little bit, but just let it go. Reinforce this shadow here while it's a little wet, and that'll keep that edge soft. And you want to wait until certain areas are dry enough so you can reapply water to keep edges soft. So it's important to wait. Timing is everything. So I'm going to test this, and it's just dry enough. So I'm going to reinforce this shadow area. And that's the advantage of doing these big areas. You can work back around. And I'm going to now I like to use a flat brush for hair because you can kind of hit and miss and catch some of these loose hairs. So while the hair is semi-wet, I'm going to work through this with a flat. This is all brushwork, this is individual to each artist. It's almost like it's like handwriting. It's nothing that you can pick up from someone else. This is just how you see it and how you choose to express it. And I like this rhythmic kind of techniques with this brush. It just adds just a little bit more texture, and rather than using a round brush, it just adds just a little interest to the hair. Once again, you're just building value. So you're still keeping your technique simple, because you're going to get fancy later, I promise. So you look at that. You got to be on your P's and Q's. It can just be over in the blink of an eye. You want to just keep the right amount of water on your brush, because that's an example of what can happen. And if you want to stay humble, this is a medium for you. It will keep you humble. You have to just stay in the moment and not get ahead of yourself. Even if it's looking really good, you don't want to just sit back and admire it and just think about how great you are. You want to just keep moving forward in humility. Just keep checking, controlling that water on your brush. So I'm just working this through. And you're waiting for other areas to dry, so you can just kind of focus on this and just make it about this. Don't really look around too much as to what's going on. Everything is taking care of itself. I used to tell some of my students, with the watercolor, even though it seems like nothing's happening, something's happening. The drying process is definitely part of creating a great watercolor painting, because you can go in too soon and create a mess if the wash isn't dry. So just let everything else take care of itself, and you just focus on these little areas, one area at a time. Just isolate it and just okay, so I'm going to actually go back, just get greedy while this is wet. These edges will stay soft, so I'm just going to jump in there and just give this one final value push. It's okay to gamble, but just make sure it's a calculated risk. You can see the difference on this third wash, how it breaks up these lighter areas. You know, it really is amazing. Without adding pigment to it, you can actually start pushing values with the same mixture. And it's something I learned early on. I thought that you had to add pigment to every single wash or glaze, and it's not true. And this keeps light running through your watercolor when you have these thin mixtures, these thin glazes. It's unlike any other medium in that respect. So I'm just going to wrap this up and let the hair dry. And you can kind of see the watercolor paper kind of bubbling up a little bit. And that's a little bit of a sign to say, hey buddy, I need to rest. Let me dry. You know, sometimes as an artist you want to just keep going forward. You just want to keep that creative muscle going, but you want to be mindful of your materials and be respectful to their limitations. Sometimes as an artist you can get so excited that you have to live in the real world a little bit. So now I'm going to focus on the arm. I'm going to wet this entire area where the highlight is, and I'm going to try to just carve out a form and make the arm look a little rounded. So I'm going to grab my beat up watercolor brush, and I'm just going to wet this whole area, this middle area. I'm going to run that all the way down. So when the watercolor hits the surface, it's going to eliminate this light area and only put the pigment where I want it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know, you just have to guesstimate it, because you can go in later and reinforce the form. So I'm going to start in the shadow side of things and just come right up against that area that I wet and let it bleed in so it has a more naturalistic look to this turn of the form. I'm going to unify this strap also. Bring that into the arm so it doesn't have a hard edge. It's all about keeping things soft. Once you have hard edges on the surface, it's really distracting to the viewer. So instead of having a line here to delineate from the light and the dark, you just want to have it bleeding so it just gradually turns and it's easy on the eye. I'm going to dry the brush off and use a little dry brush here just to gradually bring this down so it doesn't look so cut off. It kind of has a little bit of a poetry, kind of little sway to that. I'm going to re-wet this area. I'm going to push that color right up against this wet area, and it's going to create a nice soft transition. And again, I'm going to pull this strap of the dress in, just so it doesn't get a hard edge between this and the arm. So I'm just going to unify that and just put the color all the way over. And this makes a big difference for later. It really does. Keeping everything soft and just getting all this work out of the way. And that's the great part about watercolor. With other mediums, if you did a lot of this work in the other painting, you cover it up. But with watercolor, it actually plays a part in the final painting because the transparency of the medium just gives you so much complexity, and everything kind of, when the light bounces on that surface, it just kind of comes back through the image like it's backlit, and it's just really beautiful. And this is around the time in the watercolor workshops that I do where I kind of lose the audience. They're like, okay, it's gray already. Let's move on. We want color. And it's like, no, this is helping us for later. And then when they see the color go on, they're just so amazed. It's like, why did I doubt you? What? And it's funny. It's like I wrote a book on watercolor. I do magazines, and you would think that I've built up trust over the years, but nah. Seeing is believing. So we're going to push this down. And this is all brushwork too. You know, you don't want to mass everything in so it's just a static area. You just want to kind of give it a little brushwork, a little hitting and missing, because the later glaze will kind of fill that in. You'll still have that beautiful kind of rustic edge surface there. So now that this is blocked in, the shadows are broken up, I'm going to give it just a veneer of the block in, just to bring everything down into the same value. And then we'll attack the background to bring that in. But right now we're just going to hit the face. And with the watercolor, as usual, we want to preserve this highlight here. I'm going to bring the water into that. And just carve around it, let it bleed. The block-in really is 80% of the painting for me. Once that's established and you've worked out all those problems, you can just really have carte blanche when it comes to the color. You can just really be super free to just create nice, clean glazes. And now you'll notice that the figure is floating a little bit. So that tells us in our minds, you know what, something's wrong. So now we're going to unify the figure in the background. I'm going to give the background just a complete wash to try to bring it along with the subject, just so it's not floating. Because now we're really pushing value. Now we're really cooking. So I'm going to grab a bigger brush, going to move on to a number 12. And you want to choose the proper brush, because if you use a brush that's too small, you're going to leave like little hard watermarks everywhere. And if you use one too big that you can't control, you're going to have water running everywhere. So I'm going to just settle on something right in the middle of the road. This is a 12, and I can kind of just work swiftly and just pull the water down and just have a nice smooth background. So I'm just going to work top to bottom. You want to work as quickly as you can so you don't get streaky watermarks. You want to work in the same direction. You want to just work right to left. You don't want to come back across because that'll create creasing and watermarks. So just work right to left. Or if you start left to right, just work left to right. And I'm going to avoid the subject here. I'm going to go around it because that's still drying. Pull it down. I like to work both sides because if this dries, it'll have a streak running across your paper. So you want to just keep both sides going. Some people ask, why don't you just wet the whole, just block in the whole paper with gray? But that really doesn't address some of the lighter areas on the figure or the background. So you want to be able to control that as well. So you want to do it in piece, just piece it together. Rather than having one veneer of color on your painting, then you really don't have a lot of options when it comes to your lighter areas. Now I'm just going to bring this down. Keep alternating. Remember that this needs attention also, so just keep going side to side. Just take a deep breath and just calmly. It should be therapeutic. It shouldn't be stressful. This should just be just a walk in the park. And once you learn the properties of watercolor, it's not a struggle at all. It's actually learning the limitations of what the medium offers and then leaning hard on its strengths. For instance, the translucency is something that you just cannot get in other mediums. So why not take advantage of that and make that something that's an asset rather than something to be feared. Okay, now those values are reading much more true. So when I get to this point, I normally stop and just let the paper rest because every area that I've worked on is basically wet, so there's nowhere for me to go. So I just step away, maybe get a coffee, check an email, check your Instagram, give it a good 10 minutes, and then come back and start again. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to stop here, let it dry, and then we're going to come back, and then we'll start really pushing those values in the face and the hair and the dress, and then we'll start looking for the moment where we can start adding color. Okay, so we took about a 10-minute break to just let everything settle and dry. And now we're going to go back for our third push and start really breaking up shapes and adding another value. So I'm going to start with the dress. I'm just going to darken that and then kind of break the ice, and then I'm going to start working around to the darker values. So I'm going to take my number 7. I like to start with my darkest darks just to push them and let them dry. And as I go on with my values and get deeper, I'm going to start giving a little bit more, being more particular with my brush work. So if there's a small shadow area, I'm just going to pick that up and let that dry and come back and glaze over it. And as you can see, I'm controlling the amount of water on my brush, so things aren't meandering as much, because now I'm really trying to carve out some of my lights. And there's a light coming from the front of this plane, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water to that. And the surface is dry enough, I can do that. Just so this area doesn't look too flat. So I'm just going to indicate that light. And I can come back later and glaze this area and make it darker, but I'm just going to be respectful to that light for now. It's all about planning, having a good plan and working that plan. Makes your life so much more simple. And again, not worrying about anything too complicated, because there's a big shadow here that comes off the back of this arm that I'm going to have to contend with. But for now, I'm just really worrying about what's darker than what. That's my biggest concern. I'm not worried about really getting into the form or anything complicated. I'm just really trying to establish my values. So you just want to work one thing at a time. Right now, we're just focused on values. You can't underestimate the importance of values. When you look at a painting and it reads very pleasing to the eye, you don't really know why, because value rarely gets a lot of attention, but it really is a super important component of painting. And right now, you're just enjoying the process. Nothing's really complicated. Nothing's running all over the place. You're not hurting cats. You're just putting watercolor on the surface. Not really thinking about color at all. A lot of people ask me, they try to trick me. They're like, do you do this process for landscapes? Do you do this for animals? Don't overthink it. Let's keep it the same way every time. That way you can kind of predict your results instead of changing and tweaking things and overthinking it. Just keep it the same way every time. It's very human to think it just can't be this simple. It's too good to be true. But in this case, it's Pretty straightforward. Again, wetting this area to isolate it. Keep it light. Reinforce the shadow on the cheek. And really control the amount of watercolor on your brush too. Where things roll into the light, you want to just really be respectful of that and just have a little bit of color on your brush, and you can just really pull it down and manipulate it. There's a light area coming over top of this. So we're going to soften that and just put the color underneath it. And we're really just retracing our footsteps for what we did in the first pass. That's all we're doing. This is a fun stage because in this stage you can start to see the forms emerge. You can really see the shapes being broken up. And it gets you excited about adding color to it. It starts to come to life a little bit. And that's what we want. We don't want a stagnant portrait that doesn't have life, it's not inspiring. We want to kind of mimic what's going on in real life. Keeping everything soft. Now I'm going to bring this darker area in so I can kind of break up the background, because it can be a little stagnant, a little boring if it's just this white, flat white background. So I want to bring in a little bit of the composition that I've drawn in just to kind of break these up and have this sheet kind of like draping down and bring some of that complexity into the background.
Nearly every portrait artist has looked at a high-quality watercolor painting and thought, wow, I really wish I could do that. Maybe you've tried watercolors and didn't have great success. Or maybe you've been told never bother because it's too difficult, dries out before you can fix things, and the results you get might look like a first grader painted it. Well, believe us when we say that you can do this. You can paint portraits with watercolor and create gorgeous pieces of art that will be treasured for generations to come. How can you do that? The absolute best way to discover how to confidently paint portraits with watercolor is to learn from a master. And in this instructional video, you'll be learning from one of the best. This is Mario A. Robinson Watercolor Portraits, a step-by-step tutorial that will help you in your quest to become a highly skilled watercolor portrait painter. As you watch and paint right along with Mario, you'll begin to see for yourself how to maximize on every characteristic of watercolor painting. The block end phases, adding local color, developing the color and value, using brush techniques to sculpt and unify your painting. It's all here for you. A highly acclaimed artist, author, and instructor, Mario will break every myth about watercolor. You'll be mesmerized as he shows you how to overcome each hurdle, drips, hard edges, too fast drying times, and color variations, all the things that keep you from getting better at watercolor painting or from even trying it for the first time.
You can't underestimate the importance of values. You know, when you look at a painting and it reads very pleasing to the eye, you don't really know why, because value rarely gets a lot of attention, but it really is a super important component of painting.
Mario takes you through nearly every stroke of his paintbrush. He not only tells you what he's doing, but why he's doing it, and how it will help you in your own paintings. You'll be missing out on one of the best watercolor portrait lessons ever created if you don't add this video to your collection of resources. With over 5 hours of instruction, you are getting a comprehensive guide to nearly every aspect of painting portraits with watercolor. Become a better watercolor artist and a better portrait painter now with Mario A. Robinson Watercolor Portraits. Order your DVD or digital download today.
Well, that is Watercolor Portraits with Mario Robinson. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. There's a full-length video showing his entire process. And we have a special discount on it today only. You can find the discount code in the comments section. Now let's get right to our interview with Mario Robinson.
I'm Mario Robinson, and I'm a watercolor artist, and I live in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. Well, my style of painting can best be described as in the lineage of Winslow Homer and Andrew Wyeth. It's the American tradition of painting. So it really kind of captures what American life is like in everyday lives of Americans. I use storytelling in my work primarily because the people and the places that I paint are very personal to me. So I don't paint a lot of people that I don't know. I paint mostly family and friends. So I want to kind of make it more about the people and the places rather than, you know, my style and my technique and the medium that I'm using. So most of the times the things that I'm painting are very personal. So I really want to kind of capture that and make the viewer feel what I feel about the people and the places that I choose to paint. When I'm painting, the thing that I most want to say is, first and foremost, I'm enraptured. I'm captured by the human condition. The human condition is something very inspiring to me. I've seen people at their best. I've seen people at their worst, and I really want to convey the feeling of being alive. Especially in the 21st century, it's an exciting time to really be a human being. So there are a lot of things that I could paint that I'm inspired by, but the thing I'm most captivated by is the human and the things that they go through in their daily lives. The medium of watercolor allows me to kind of delineate myself from other artists. Most artists are working in oil painting, acrylic, other mediums that aren't as to have a little bit more of a fixable kind of character. Watercolor is just unpredictable. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me excited about being in the studio or plein air painting. So there's never a dull moment with watercolor, and it's just very spontaneous. And I think it captures the free side of my personality. I first started painting my freshman year of college, actually. I got accepted at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, which is where I received my education. And my portfolio was all drawings, which a lot of people told me that you needed to kind of have a varied selection of things for them to look at. And I just had all drawings because I love drawings. And my first year of painting at Pratt was actually oil painting. And we learned a classical style of painting. And we would go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I was just captivated by the colors and the brilliance of these oil paintings. And that's when I was kind of bit by the bug, my freshman year of college. The thing that most inspires me to paint now is the people that I'm allowed to kind of bring into my studio and work with, and people that give me their time. I'm always amazed when someone says, can you paint me, or will you capture me? And that's the thing that excites me the most, because it's actually an honor to spend time with people, and they're very free with their time most of the time. And one of my most memorable moments was painting my mom. And we were sitting on the porch one day, and I said, why don't you just go throw a hat on? Why don't you let me paint your portrait? And she stubbornly did, and we were sitting out there on the porch, and it was hot, and she was irritable. But something kind of happened in that moment where we were actually connecting on a different level. And I really realized in that moment the power of art. We were not mother and son at that point, but we were just two people enjoying an experience. And it was great. My portrait paintings are something that many people think that that's my absolute favorite thing to do. And it is. I really love painting portraits. I love painting landscapes. But a lot of times when I'm out there painting inanimate objects, I circle back to the portrait and really fall in love with it every time I do it. And to see these images come alive right in front of you, they go from just being maybe a pencil drawing to a block in, and then you go further and you start really investigating the person. It becomes more than a pursuit of painting. It becomes an exploration of who these individuals are. And I started to realize that human beings are extremely complex. You go into it with one set of, one objective, and as you're going through the painting process and you're spending time with people, you really get into the soul of who the person is, and that's what I really, enjoy the most about painting portraits. The most difficult thing about painting a portrait is try not to overly work something. When you feel very deeply about something, you want to do your best and you want to just execute things at a very high level, and you want to just impress people that are going to see it. So the hardest thing for me is not really the execution of the techniques and the things that I'm very comfortable with. It's actually just pulling myself back and knowing when you've actually done enough and you've said enough, and you're not getting in the way of the viewer's experience by trying to show off and be that much of a technician. The thing I enjoy the most about painting a portrait really is the reaction of other people that see it. Now that we're living in a social media age, you can kind of get an immediate response. And the thing I enjoy the most is not really doing it because I've done it for so long. I'm always, it never gets old to hear people comment on the paintings. And one thing that they always say is, you get into the soul of the person or of a likeness. So that's the thing I enjoy the most, is the reaction of other people to my work. Other subject matters that I enjoy painting, other than portraits, are landscapes and seascapes. I live on the Jersey Shore, so I'm just a few minutes walk away from the beach, and I go out there and everything is so open, and the sky like envelops you. And being out there in nature and hearing the sounds, the seagulls, the roar of the ocean, and being out there and painting in plein air, it's nothing like it. Painting portraits is something, very near and dear to my heart, but it offers just a different experience. So painting in nature, I would have to say, is one of my favorite things to paint. A lot of people ask me, why do you paint watercolor? And it's a fair question, because most people paint in oils and things that are just a little bit more vibrant, and you're able to make mistakes, whereas watercolor holds you to a higher level, holds you to account, and you have to really hit your mark, and you have to be sure of what you're doing. And that instant gratification also is something that is just so enjoyable. And I can't really explain it the way I really feel it. Watercolor is it's like herding cats sometimes, but it's actually worth it when you pull off something and you're able to sit back and appreciate that journey that you took to get there. The most difficult part about painting with watercolor is the part where it's almost like a heartbreak. One time I got to almost the end of a painting, and it was going really well, And I was actually under a deadline for a magazine. And they were calling me and they were on me, and I'm almost done. I'm going to send you the high-res images. I got to the end of it, and I put a wash down. I put the brush down right on the top of the person's face, and a streak of water just dripped right down the face, and I had to start over. And I had to stay up for 24 hours to finish the painting. So that's one thing that, in those moments, I can hear those voices of other people saying, why do you do this to yourself? So that's probably one of the worst parts about watercolors, because you can ruin it in an instant. The thing I like most about painting with watercolor is the rush that I get when I see that brush hit the paper. And from the first mark that you make to the last, everything's in transient. Everything is moving, you know, living on the ocean, you know, the roar of the ocean and the way the tumultuous energy of the ocean is something that I love. So painting with watercolor, it mimics that energy of nature. And I have to stand to do it. I'm not sitting there, I'm not, you know, it's not boring. I'm always in motion. And the thing I like most about it is that it just gives me energy. In the beginning of my career, I used to actually be able to define benchmarks, like my favorite paintings. And as I've created thousands of paintings at this point, I've kind of looked at my body of work as one whole painting. It all kind of converges together. So I'll pick different pieces where I was kind of successful at this part, and this part is loose, this part is tight. So I kind of look at it as a whole, but if I had to actually answer that question honestly, one of the most recent paintings that I did was a self-portrait, and I wore a big plein air painter's hat that my dad gave me years ago in front of the ocean, because Hurricane Sandy in 2012 was a very pivotal moment for me. I kind of survived the flood, the hurricane. So I painted myself in front of the ocean with my back to the ocean, and that day the ocean was really rough, and it almost gave me PTSD being out there, but I journeyed on through it and I painted that portrait, and you can almost see the pain and the fear in my face as I'm hearing those sounds. And I got to a very visceral kind of emotion in that portrait, and I called it Sandy's Wake. So it's kind of haunting when I think about what ended up happening to Sandy's Wake. In April, I was doing a plein air competition in Atlanta, and I had my bag with me and I had my painting separate next to it. And I got to my host's house and I said, I don't have my paintings. Sandy's Wake and two other paintings that I did on the ocean were in that bag, and I left it in the airport. So no one called me about it. I put in lost and found reports, and it's just gone. I lost it. That was April 30th. It's gone. One thing that will help students better understand watercolor is it's a free flowing medium. And by that I mean you can guide it, but you should not try to control it and hold on with two hands and just really be too overbearing with it. Watercolor is at its best when it's allowed to meander and be free. I think if someone chooses to paint watercolor, they're kind of like me, they're like a free spirit. So you have to make sure it fits your personality. If you're a person if you're a control freak, if you really have to be overbearing with paintings and your technique, watercolor is not for you. But if you feel like you have that type of personality, I just say go for it. I think people should choose to paint portraits because it's one of the most complex subjects in the genres. I think that painting portraits challenges you to really be true to yourself as an artist. Like if you're painting an apple or you're painting an inanimate object, it can be any object. But when you're painting a person, it's very specific. So it really challenges you to dig really deeply into who and what you are as a technician or a draftsman, and forces you to really be honest.
Well, that is Mario Robinson, and the video is called Watercolor Portraits, and you can learn more about the full-length video at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, there's a special today-only discount. You can find the code in the comments section. Want to remind you that we have a terrific 2-hour video over $100 value, and it's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets from the World's Leading Artists. And you can get it for free at 97tips.com. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Eric Rhodes. We'll see you tomorrow.
Nearly every portrait artist has looked at a high-quality watercolor painting and thought, wow, I really wish I could do that. Maybe you've tried watercolors and didn't have great success. Or maybe you've been told never bother because it's too difficult, dries out before you can fix things, and the results you get might look like a first grader painted it. Well, believe us when we say that you can do this. You can paint portraits with watercolor and create gorgeous pieces of art that will be treasured for generations to come. How can you do that? The absolute best way to discover how to confidently paint portraits with watercolor is to learn from a master. And in this instructional video, you'll be learning from one of the best. This is Mario A. Robinson Watercolor Portraits, a step-by-step tutorial that will help you in your quest to become a highly skilled watercolor portrait painter. As you watch and paint right along with Mario, you'll begin to see for yourself how to maximize on every characteristic of watercolor painting. The block-end phases, adding local color, developing the color and value, using brush techniques to sculpt and unify your painting. It's all here for you. A highly acclaimed artist, author, and instructor, Mario will break every myth about watercolor. You'll be mesmerized as he shows you how to overcome each hurdle. Drips, hard edges, too fast drying times, and color variations, all the things that keep you from getting better at watercolor painting or from even trying it for the first time.
You can't underestimate the importance of values. You know, when you look at a painting and it reads very pleasing to the eye, you don't really know why, because value rarely gets a lot of attention, but it really is a super important component of painting.
Mario takes you through nearly every stroke of his paintbrush. He not only tells you what he's doing, but why he's doing it, and how it will help you in your own paintings. You'll be missing out on one of the best watercolor portrait lessons ever created if you don't add this video to your collection of resources. With over 5 hours of instruction, you are getting a comprehensive guide to nearly every aspect of painting portraits with watercolor. Become a better watercolor artist and a better portrait painter now with Mario A. Robinson Watercolor Portraits. Order your DVD or digital download today